Graham Park is the president of the Shooters Union of Australia. He joins us from Warwick, Queensland today. Graham, how are you going?
Very well, thanks, Ricky.
Graham, look, I've had some experience myself. I had some time in politics about this National Firearms Agreement. You notice that the recent moves by the Western Australian government signals that maybe it's a bit of a gentleman's agreement, really. They're moving in their own direction.
Well, it always, despite what's reported or what some politicians say, it is purely a gentleman's agreement. It has no force in law, and West Australia seems to want to move right away from it.
And it does seem that Western Australia is sort of taking their talking points from the Americans about these mental health checks now is what they're pushing when it comes to people getting a firearms licence.
Well, it's interesting because the West Australian printed an article from a leading psychologist over there that said it will degrade psychological services in the state. There's simply not enough people for a start. Secondarily, they can't tell off one visit. I mean, I think you and I would know if someone was that big a maniac in a few minutes. That's why it hasn't been done really anywhere around the place. In Queensland, what they do is if you've had problems, then you have to get a letter from the doctor or specialist. But to have ongoing ones, the costs would be tremendous, and it would take away from things. We did a survey in Queensland, and we found that more than 30% of people would, if they thought they would lose their firearms license, they would then not seek medical help for a mental or emotional issue. And Australia has spent 30, 40 years encouraging people to seek treatment, that mental distress is an illness like any other and should be treated. And now we turn around and want to treat them like pariahs. It seems very strange to me. There's obviously people with serious mental illness shouldn't have firearms, but what they're proposing is from another planet.
And this proposal from the Western Australian signals a departure from that, what you're calling a gentleman's agreement, that is the National Firearms Agreement, because usually isn't it the case that states tend to sort of all get together and go, we're all moving in this direction, but WA, excuse the pun, has jumped the gun.
Yes, they have. States do tend to do that, and all the states except Western Australia have done that for many years. Western Australia is the only state that does not recognise your firearms licence from another state. If you travel there for a competition or if you're a farm worker going over there to work or something, you have to actually go into a West Australian police station and effectively get a West Australian licence while you're there. That's totally outside the National Firearms Agreement as well, because every other state, if I come to South Australia for a competition or something, I can use mine just like I do my driver's licence.
Now, I understand that Western Australia has, ever since the big federation, if not before, always done things their own way, but they have apparently gone and taken or changed the licensing requirements for a whole bunch of rifles as well. And is this going ahead of where the National Firearms Agreement is at the moment?
It's totally in opposition to many aspects of the NFA, to be honest. Singling out calibers like this makes no sense at all. Not one caliber on that list has ever been used in any crime anywhere in the country. Many or most of them are in rifles that are in the $5,000 to $10,000 and above range that are very few people own, but they're looking for a headline, is what I would suggest.
And when it comes to, I guess, this topic, I think just for the listeners' benefit, we're talking about the Shooters Union of Australia. You represent licensed firearm owners, and I imagine you do want to restrict the circulation of unregistered and black market firearms in Australia.
We do. In Australia, somewhere around 5% of all criminal misuse of firearms, of violent misuse of firearms, robberies, murders, things like that, are committed by a licensed firearm or a licensed firearm owner. So 95% are not. And there's no law is going to prevent that, because by the very nature they're outside of the system. What we try and do is we would like to bring people into the system and have the government's focus on criminal activity, so that they can reduce criminal activity, which is dangerous to us all.
And I guess when it comes to this national firearms agreement, there are times when it moves in one direction or another, and it does seem to often be in a reaction to an incident that occurs. I know there was in Queensland that terrible incident involving police officers that died, and there was always calls off the back of media focus on this. How does a national firearms agreement progress one way or the other? Are there regular meetings about it, or does it tend to be sort of in fits and starts?
It tends to be in fits and starts when there's attention on it. I say that, but every few years they will look at things and see if it needs some technical upgrades because of technical shifts in things. But generally speaking, it's an impetus like that incident in Queensland, which when you look at it and you go, wait a minute, no one there held a valid firearms license. One of them formerly had a New South Wales licence, which had been suspended 9 months before. They had 6 firearms there. 4 of them had never been registered in any state, and 2 of them were previously registered to that one brother on his New South Wales licence. No change to any of the laws would change it, but I think politicians do love to get out and jump up and down. I think what might change it is procedures and looking at dangerous people a little bit closer.
And when it comes to the policing in this area, what is your focus is really, you represent licensed firearm owners. Is there sufficient policing going on of those who are not registered to hold a firearms licence or who are trafficking in unregistered firearms?
No, not at all. We see, if you look at the spending, the budgetary things across Australia, well over 90% of the police and regulatory funding is directed at farmers and target shooters and guys who collect old guns, who are basically the most harmless member of society. They're vetted, they're tested, they're trained, everything else. They're not a problem. And under 10% goes towards criminal misuse. And what we say is, let's take 90% of the money and put it to criminal misuse. Let's lock people up who steal guns. Let's treat people very harshly who commit, violent offences with a firearm. Let's go after that. And the legitimate shooting community in Australia is behind that 100%.
And I guess that comes to that point you make about farmers in particular in our broadcast areas. A firearm is a tool that they need to use in their business. Sometimes they're even heavily restricted in terms of, say, when you've got overabundant kangaroo numbers, how many of those you can drop with a firearm. Is there a view that you're advocating that we need, from the Shooters Union Australia point of view, that we need to maybe enable farmers to use the firearms they need in their businesses?
Yes, we've long lobbied for and worked with agricultural groups in different states for farmers to have access to the tools of trade they need. If they say they need a certain type of tractor, they go and get it. If we need a certain type of header or a certain type of other equipment, we get it. However, with a firearm, it's kind of like, oh, well, you can have this one, but not that one. And surely it should be up to the person running that business. I mean, yes, they should be trained or they should be vetted. I'm not saying that, but they should have access to the tools of trade so that they can effectively control the feral animal problem and effectively euthanize injured stock, which is the 2 most common uses in agriculture.
And just lastly, you mentioned about, law enforcement targeting dangerous individuals. The Western Australian government say they want mental health checks now before someone can get a firearms licence. How do we identify those that really shouldn't be having firearms in the first place?
Well, that would be it's very difficult. The psychologists I've talked to said they simply wouldn't do something like that on a single visit. They would want 3 or 4 different visits to be able to do that. That would probably cost someone in time 5 or 6 months and maybe $1,500, $2,000 in fees, which seems incredible. And all that can tell them is what the person's like on a given day. As an example, in New South Wales, when a police recruit, they all get one mental health check. Same as in Western Australia. They never get ongoing ones, by the way, and they walk around with a gun all day. But they have one mental health check when they're in training. In New South Wales, and I don't know the numbers for the other states, but in New South Wales, 45% of the recruits fail their initial mental health test. They then go away And I guess, I don't know whether they get coaching or whether they just think about it a bit and they go back and then they get through.
Yeah, it's an interesting one and a difficult topic because you're looking at, you see older people finding it hard to give up a driver's license because their doctor's saying they really shouldn't be driving. The firearm is another one that's going to be very hard for people to part with.
Very, very difficult. And one of the suggestions that we've made at both state and federal level is that if someone holds a driver's license, then that fulfills any physical requirement that might go with the firearm, because it takes more physical and mental dexterity to drive a motor vehicle in traffic than it does to use a firearm at a range or on a farm. So that could actually be somewhat linked together, that, you don't have to look hard at the physical side of someone if they're still holding a driver's license. And then perhaps when someone gets so old they need to give up their driver's license, then perhaps they should have another little test. And I know it's a painful subject, and I'm not that young myself, but I mean, it is something that we can all look at.
Absolutely. Look, it's been good talking with you, Graham Park, President of the Shooters Union of Australia. We'll see whether this Western Australian move picks up any steam across the Nullarbor. Thanks for joining us today on Flow.
Thank you, Ricky.
And a postscript to that interview: if you are needing help regarding mental health issues, Beyond Blue is available, 1300 22 46 36, or if you are in crisis, please call Lifeline 13 11 14, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or their SMS service 0477 13 11 14.